Hello and welcome to Lesson 6, Cognitive Explanations for Offending Behaviour. Now, let's imagine that you are sitting in a bar. You look across the room and you see a guy staring at you, so you look away. Every now and then you look out the corner of your eye and he's still staring at you, really glaring you down. What possible explanation might you have or might you interpret for his actions? That's scenario 1. Scenario 2 is your friend invites all of your squad to a party, but not you. What explanation could possibly be the correct one to illustrate why you were not invited? Your answer will be relevant in just a moment. So what we're going to look at today is cognitive explanations of offending behaviour, specifically two. One is the development of moral reasoning, and the second is going to be cognitive distortions. The idea being is if our thinking is faulty, then maybe our rationale for crime is faulty as well. And also if our development, if we're morally underdeveloped, maybe that will lead us to criminal acts. So let's start with cognitive distortions. There are many, such as confirmation bias. There is something like perfectionism and stuff like that. These are all cognitive biases. So if we take confirmation bias, this is where you seek out information that confirms your prejudices. So you believe women are inferior to men, therefore every time you see a woman commit a faux pas or a mistake, you say, aha. A classic example is my granddad, who used to be a driving instructor, who believed that women were inferior drivers. So every time he had a female student in the car and they made a mistake, this would confirm his hypothesis. However, it's likely that he actually made many of these students perform those mistakes by his overall attitude. So it's a very complex feedback system as well. The first cognitive bias we're going to look at then is the hostile attribution bias. Have a look at this video. What I want you to decide is this happy chappy here deliberately trying to ruin this guy's day? Ooh, it's a tough one. I think I saw a slight smirk on this guy's face before he went to reach for the crayon. It's a tough one. If you are this chap and you have a hostile attribution bias, your response is likely to assume that he did it on purpose. His motives were to ruin your piece of work and by definition affect you in some negative way, and therefore your response to that reaction is going to be very different than if you think it was an accident. Let's have a look at this one. Here's one that we've viewed in previous videos as well. I'll just speed it up. So the car is following too close to the red VW. The guy gets out, he has words with the driver. This doesn't resolve it, so he goes to the next level. This guy thinks that the person driving behind him, whatever their infringement was, they were doing it on purpose. They were doing it to ruin, to threaten his life, or to damage his car, or some other sort of threatening act. Remember, attribution literally means to attribute motives to someone, to attribute intent. And we do this all the time. We absolutely are always looking for the intent in other people. But if you have these cognitive distortions, you are not weighing reality objectively. You're actually distorting it. And it often causes the individual with a hostile attribution bias to always think the worst of other people's actions. Okay, two more cognitive biases. One is magnification and one is minimization, or sometimes referred to as minimalization. So magnification, this is where consequences are blown out of proportion. So you go for a job interview and you don't get it. Well, chances are if there are 10 people, you've got a 1 in 10 chance of getting the job. Those odds aren't great. However, you walk out the room and you say to yourself, aha, the reason I didn't get that job was because he was a misogynist and I'm a woman and that's why he didn't hire me. That's possible. That happens. But is it plausible? I don't know. It depends. If you already believe that and you have a hostile attribution bias, for example, then magnification comes very easy to you. Another example is you are driving home and you get a ticket for speeding. None of your friends ever get caught, but you get caught. So you blow it out of proportion. You say it's the worst thing that's ever happened to you because it's you. We tend to magnify the behavior other people do towards us, whereas minimization tends to occur when we've acted inappropriately. So this is where, for example, the Robin Hood effect comes in. Yes, we're stealing, and yes, it's wrong, but he's rich. He's got loads of money. That sheriff of Nottingham, he's loaded. He's not going to miss, a few bags of gold. So we minimize our own actions or the consequence of those actions to make them seem more benign. These two mechanisms are cognitive biases, and you can see how criminals might engage in both of these. Aggression by magnifying the behaviors of others and hostile attribution, as well as minimization in thinking that, the crime you committed isn't that bad. And sometimes students will say things to me like, it's only one piece of work I've missed. Yeah, all right, yeah, it is only one for now, but that doesn't make it right. So, research support for the hostile attribution bias and minimization. Schoenberg showed emotionally ambiguous faces to 55 violent offenders, and if the face had just even a slight trace of anger in it, they categorized it as an angry face. This suggests that they are on the lookout for hostile intent, and when they see an ambiguous situation, they interpret it in a hostile way. Kennedy and Grubin found that sex offenders, when they were describing their crimes, they downplayed their behavior. For example, the offender suggests that the victim's behavior contributed, like she wanted it, she was wearing a short skirt, she knew what she was doing, blah, blah, blah. This is a form of minimization, and a fairly despicable one. But Maruna and Mann actually argue that things like minimization, they're normal. Hostile attribution bias isn't, but minimization is normal, and we all do it. We all downplay our own involvement and complicity in behavior that we're not proud of, and it's almost like a natural human endeavor. So the degree to which minimization is a criminal trait may be questionable. And you can imagine this. We've talked about dispositional versus situational. So, we assume dispositional when it's other people, they're just bad people. But when it's us, there's lots of circumstantial explanations. And there's actually a good synoptic link here to Zimbardo, who argued that the reason why the guards behaved the way they did was not because of any dispositional factors. They weren't bad people, it was just a situation. In other words, they essentially minimized or were involved in minimization. And you could see this in the commentary after the experiment, the interviews, where the guards were saying things like, I was running my own experiments, and I wouldn't have done anything really serious and stuff like that. They were minimizing how severe their behavior was. Application then. Always think application as you're going through all this stuff. Well, Heller et al. 2013 worked with a group of young men who were mainly from disadvantaged groups in Chicago. Chicago is one of the deadliest cities in America. It has one of the highest murder rates of any city, and it is a pretty unsafe place to live. Gang culture is rife there. Industry is almost non-existent now. Well, by working with this group, they managed to result in a 44% reduction in arrests. And you can see guide notes, which has a bit more detail on this. So this shows how correcting cognitive bias can actually improve outcomes. So that's hostile attribution, cognitive biases. Now we're going to look at Kohlberg's theory of moral development. Now, this is going to make this video a bit longer than I normally do. And the reason why is because Kohlberg's coming up in another module that we're going to be studying a bit later. So it's a good idea to get some of these foundations now. And indeed, you've actually covered some of this already. So Kohlberg develops a stage theory of moral development. This is Kohlberg there in his youth, relative youth. He was a professor at Yale, and he argued that we develop morality through 6 stages. Stage 1, real emphasis on punishment and the consequences of our actions. Stage 2 tends to be more about risk. Stage 3 is about expectations of others. Stage 4, we start to consider society into our moral reasoning. And then stage 5 and 6, we're on this sort of social contract, moving on to these universal principles. He broke this down into 3 levels. Pre-conventional level, this is very young children up until about the age of 12. From about the age of 12, we go to the conventional level of reasoning, and then some of us reach post-conventional a bit later. So, in order to explain this, he used a series of scenarios, and the most famous one is Heinz's dilemma. Now, Heinz's wife is near death from a very rare type of cancer. There is one drug produced by one pharmacist that could save her life. The pharmacist wants to charge Heinz $2,000 for the drug, even though it only costs $200 to make. Heinz tries to raise money, but can only raise $1,000. He asks the pharmacist whether he would sell it to him for less and he'll pay him later or some other deal. The pharmacist refuses and says that he invested a lot of his own time into developing the drug and money, and he's only going to sell it for $2,000. Heinz then, in desperation, breaks into the pharmacy and steals the drug. Was he right to do it? This question has been given to tens of thousands, probably, of children and adults, and their responses and interviews afterwards have been recorded and fed back. First of all, consider what you would do. Pause the video, actually come up with an answer. Okay. According to Kohlberg, in his study, he found that these 6 stages corresponded to different types of moral reasoning when it came to Heinz's dilemma. So 5, 6 and 8-year-olds, depending on the sample, obviously. Some children develop much faster than others, so just be aware of that. A 5-year-old said he shouldn't steal because stealing is wrong and he'll get punished. So back on that emphasis of punishment, the consequences of your action. No, because a policeman would catch him. Again, more consequence. Heinz can steal it. He asks first, and it's not like he stole something big. He won't get punished. So the 8-year-old's taking a slightly more nuanced approach, and it's probably moving on to stage 2, but they're still heavily focused on this punishment. Then we get to stage 2, so we're still in the pre-conventional stage. And one child says Heinz might steal it because maybe they had children and he might need someone at home to look after them, but maybe he shouldn't steal it because they might put him in prison for more years. So the reasoning's becoming a bit more sophisticated, and this child was around 9, I think, or 10. A bit more sophisticated, and they're working more on risk, like he could do it, but they might still put him in prison. One of the best responses from Kohlberg's study, though, was that he might not want to do it so that because he might want to marry a younger wife, implying that after his current wife had expired, he might see some reward in that. But still, we're stuck on this sort of punishment reward element. Then we move on to the conventional stage, and this occurs sort of 12, 13 onwards. One 13-year-old says intentions were good, that of saving a life of someone he loves. So we're focusing more on the intentions. We're not just strictly focused on obedience equals reward and disobedience equals punishment. Now we're talking about what someone intends from their actions. And interestingly, young children are very focused on whether or not something is permitted. And you can, ask a young child, for example, is it right to hit someone? And they'll say no. And then you say, what if a teacher told you to hit someone? And often they'll say, then it would be okay. So now we're talking about the intent of the individual. 14-year-old said he was a good man, and another 14-year-old said the pharmacist was greedy. So they were analysing the motives of the pharmacist. And this leads to the classic example of killing Hitler. If you could go back in time and kill Hitler, would you do it? Would the sacrifice of one life be worth it? Could you murder someone in order to save others? Can Heinz steal the drug? Stage 4. A 13-year-old, so we're still in this sort of age group. Heinz should accept the consequences of his action. If he steals a drug, he should go to jail. So they're recognising the intent is good, but they're also recognising that there are certain laws that have social consequences. And a 14-year-old said, it is wrong to steal, and if everyone did what Heinz did, it would be bad for the country. And what they probably mean by that is, if every time you needed something, you just stole it, well, the economy wouldn't work, society couldn't operate. So they're focusing on a slightly higher level here. They're not just thinking about the individuals involved, they're thinking about the wider, broadening context, i.e. society. Then we can reach post-conventional stage. This is when most adults sort of arrive at. From a moral standpoint, already we know this more sophisticated argument. Heinz should save the life of even a stranger, since to be consistent, the value of life means any life. The judge should weigh the moral standpoint more heavily, but preserve the legal law in punishing Heinz lightly. So what they're saying is the law should be flexible enough to recognise the moral intent of Heinz, and that should be levied in his punishment. So they're not just saying he was right to do it, and they're not saying he was right to do it and he should go to prison for the assigned 10 years or whatever. They're saying he should have done it, that was right, but also that there should be some recognition. He should be punished for the good of society to uphold laws, but there should be some mitigation. And this because people are concerned about the social contract. Yes, you should obey laws, but laws should largely be just and fair. And in this case, you could argue there was a degree of unfairness. And this leads to stage 6, what Kohlberg argues is the sort of ultimate stage of moral reasoning. Heinz should not be punished because his actions are moral, and the laws of society in defending the pharmacist's property rights over Heinz's wife were immoral. Therefore, Heinz should not be punished at all. So they're taking it a step further. They're saying that actually the law should be changed because the law is wrong. And this one is recognises the role of things like civil disobedience. So the stage before would be, you do the crime, but you do a slightly diminished sentence because there's some leniency. Here, we're operating in sort of civil rights world where right is right, and the law, if it is against the moral good, then it needs to change. It needs to go. And how do you do that? Civil disobedience. It's okay to disobey laws if they're unjust laws. And this is about generating that universal principle, this moral universe that isn't just about obeying laws, it's about shaping them as well. So according to Kohlberg, those are the 6 stages. Reread them in your guide notes and try and get your head around them now. As I said, this could be huge in the next topic that we look at on cognitive development. So, what can we say about evidence for moral underdevelopment in offenders? Well, Hollin carries out some great research, and Hollin cited in The Anatomy of Violence, that book that I'm always talking about. Read it. It is a mind-blowing experience. Argues that criminals are likely stuck at the pre-conventional level. So they'll commit crimes if they think they can get away with it, or they won't commit crimes if they think they'll get caught. And in their study, 126 young offenders in a Young Offenders Institute were compared to non-delinquents from the Midlands. All participants were given a socio-reflection measure short form. Essentially, it's a way of measuring moral development using dilemmas. The delinquent group showed less mature moral reasoning than the non-delinquent group, which is kind of what you'd expect. You'd expect, criminals to be, if this theory is correct, criminals to be underdeveloped in this capacity. There are some limitations, though. The criminals in the study were largely, or the offenders were largely male, and the majority of crime was committed by men, but the control group consisted of both males and females. So that could be a source of bias there. And to some extent, one of the limitations of moral reasoning is that it actually ignores the impulsivity of many crimes. Some rapes, some murders, some thefts even, are largely impulsive crimes. They're not crimes of deliberate reasoning. In fact, reasoning probably plays no role. And think of Dante Page that we looked at last lesson. Vile, despicable, aggressive act. There was no planning. He was just making it up as he went along. There was no evidence of moral reasoning. And to what degree are these sort of theories scientific, really? Are they falsifiable? We can carry out research that supports it, but can we conclusively falsify these claims? Further evidence, Gudjonsson and Chen, both studies seem to support this idea. So Gudjonsson, they use the OMQ, they look at 128 juvenile offenders, 38% did not consider the consequences of their actions, and 36 did not believe that they'd be caught. Now, if you don't believe you'll be caught and you're at pre-conventional moral reasoning, well, the deterrence is not there. So you're going to do the act. Chen, in Taiwan, 330 adolescent offenders aged 12 to 18, they found that more advanced reasoning, the less likely they were involved in violent crimes. So that's interesting. It's not just crime generally, it's specific types of crime. And violent crime does tend to be that more impulsive, not thinking out the consequence of your action. So the more cognitive moral reasoning you have, the less likely you are to engage in that. Though this research is correlational, it does actually support cross-cultural validity of Kohlberg's theory. Lots of issues with Kohlberg. I mean, a lot of emphasis on moral thinking rather than actual behaviour, and thinking and behaviour are not always as tightly linked as we believe they are. Not all actions are planned out. Often actions occur and are sort of, according to Jonathan Haidt, our press secretary makes up reasons later. And that's probably true for a lot of moral reasoning. Moral considerations could be overridden by practical concerns. So Heinz, you may think, he's immoral to do so, but if you are faced with stealing and saving a loved one, hopefully every single one of you will steal. I mean, the idea that you would allow a loved one to die, accept the consequences by all means, but from a practical point of view, the need to save someone you love has got to be up here, and the need to obey a law like prohibition against theft. I mean, murder would be a bit more tricky. That'd be more difficult to justify. But you get my point. Gilligan suggests the theory contains gender bias. Kohlberg's original samples were males, and there may be some, indeed, beta bias involved. Is it scientific? Is it? Does it make clear predictions about behaviour? Is it easily testable? What moral level are you at? Is a 7-year-old, when do you go from stage 1 to stage 2? I still, in some of my moral behaviour, I still think that I'm a pre-conventional level. I still think, what are the chances I'm going to get caught or not? Lying's a good example. We all lie. In fact, chances are you've said many lies in the past hour, but often that lying is predicated on the idea: is it a white lie, i.e. unlikely to be checked or found out from? Ignores the role of biology. We talked about impulsivity and personality as well. And reductionist. It breaks it down to sort of key stages that even the method we use to investigate is dilemmas. Well, dilemmas are not the same as actual actions. But one of the strengths is it adopts sort of idiographic and nomothetic approach, because based on these interviews with children at varying stages and then adults, we can develop these general laws. Right, some practical stuff then. So that's it. That's pretty much the topic. It's worth noting that English law, the age of criminal responsibility is 10. Now this coincides quite nicely with the emergence of conventional moral reasoning. To go back much further would be to punish people at a pre-conventional stage, which could be problematic because they're dealing in rewards and punishments. They're not thinking about the intent or the moral principle to society of their actions. Children under the age of 10 can be arrested and prosecuted for a crime. There are other punishments or avenues that could be used as well. In the Netherlands and Canada, the age is 12. So most of the West has got it around this sort of Kohlbergian emergence to conventional moral reasoning, except the Japanese, who say you're not criminally responsible till you're 18, which is interesting. They take a different approach. Obviously, not big fans of Kohlberg. Age of criminal responsibility in different countries. The US ranges from the age of 6 to 12. That our wacky cousins have always got some interesting views on this. Iran, 9 for girls. So girls are far more responsible for their actions than boys, who don't come into criminal responsibility till 15. In Scotland, it's a bit later. 12, Sweden 15, Cuba 16, Brazil 18, Uruguay 18. Interesting. Just an observation, with the exception of Sweden, and probably Iran. I don't know about Iran, but if you look at the crime rate in Brazil, it's pretty high. Uruguay is pretty high. Cuba is quite high. Sweden increasing, especially with rape, actually. Maybe there's a link there between the age of criminal responsibility and crime. But different cultures essentially adopt different approaches to this. Here's a big question for you. Answer it. Come and tell me what your answer is. Why would post-conventional moral reasoning be less common in rural communities? So Colby and Kohlberg found that the stages were universal. However, post-conventional reasoning tended to be less common in rural communities. If you can explain this, drop a comment or email or something like that. So let's sum up. Cognitive explanations. We've got Kohlberg's theory, 6 stages: pre-conventional, conventional, post-conventional, and that criminals tend to be stuck in this underdeveloped moral reasoning, this pre-conventional stage. We also talked about cognitive distortions, things like hostile attribution, bias, minimization, and maximization. These are just some of the explanations. We haven't gone through all our IDAs, so there's lots of culture bias, gender bias. We briefly talked about things like scientific nature of the theory. We didn't talk so much about free will and determinism, though there is an angle there. Not a bad theory, ignores biology, ignores the power of social learning in some contexts as well. As always, if you have any questions, let me know. Thank you very much for your time, and I will see you around.